Very good afternoon to the Sports Fan Radio panel and a very special guest today, Dr. Alan Pearce. Good to have you on the program again, Alan.
Thanks for having me. It's always good to be back, having a chat.
Especially about concussion and head trauma, given there were two big announcements during the week. Because Dan's on the program today, perhaps let's look at the Boston University CTE Centre results of a study that they released at the end of August. Yep. Amazingly, 63 of 152 donated brains, or 41% of athletes under 30 had CTE at the time they were autopsied. Now, that's an incredible number.
Yeah, it certainly is a big proportion of the donated brains, and it's easy to argue that it's a biased sample because obviously the brains that Boston Uni get, and here we do too at the Brain Bank in Sydney, are generally donated by families that are concerned about the welfare of their loved ones. So we always have to preface it by saying that it's a biased sample. But even in that situation, the huge proportion of autopsy brains that had CTE certainly talks to the fact that this is not an old person's disease. It's not seen in it's seen in people who are young as much as it is in those who are older. So what this is telling us is that this is a disease relating to exposure. So if you start contact sports younger and you play exclusively, contact sports from a younger age, then your risk of CTE is certainly increased.
In fact, Alan, as I understand it, the study was of all of the studies was of under 30.
That's right.
People, and the majority were not professional NFL athletes,
right.
amateur athletes.
That's right.
High school and college kids.
Yeah, that's really right. Exactly. And this is what we've been sort of trying to, I guess, communicate, that this is not an elite athlete disease or a professional athlete disease. Anyone is just, at risk of getting this if they're getting their brain impacted multiple times, over a season, adding up over many seasons, that, these players are probably getting in the tens of thousands of impacts to the brain. So it's a disease of accumulation, and it doesn't matter if you're playing at junior level, club level, professional level. If you're getting these repetitive knocks, then we've got to, be concerned.
Alan, it's a very early days, but how seriously has this been treated? Firstly, by American authorities, and talk about the Senate inquiry, but in other countries.
Yeah, look, it certainly, I think it can be treated a little bit more seriously at the moment. It's sort of being dismissed still as something more of an exception than than something that we should be considering. There are others who are dismissing it as not even a real disease. People are trying to confuse the issue by saying, well, we do know that there are links, but we don't know, who's more likely to get it, or who's why is some people getting it, not others? How many knocks do you have to have? And they're almost trying to create this confusion around the disease, simply to try and protect the sports.
It's tried to say, but in the absence of any evidence, people will make stuff up. Nature abhors a vacuum, and that's what I think we're going to see, is that you'll have the extremes where the sports authorities are trying to say, we don't know, so let's jump to conclusions, but yet the conservative doctors, professors, yourself, surely you're saying, come on guys, 1% of the general population, as I understand, Alan, has got CTE. This is a sample with 41%. Something is going on.
Yes, that's right. And, we're certainly, not trying to be seen as anti-sport or stopping sport or anything like that. I think that's, that's one of the sort of messages that's coming back as, oh, well, they're anti-sport. Well, no, we're not. We're safer sport. We're advocating for safer sport. We want people to play these sports, but we're just wanting to raise the issue that we can't just let people keep getting hit in the head and continuing on as if it's not an issue, and especially for kids as well, is the concern that we want kids to play these sports, but we do need to ensure that they're playing these sports safely so they can play for a long time and then have a good quality of life after as well.
Alan, going here, well, you were quoted in the papers during the week, if I can read from it.
Sure.
Urology expert Alan Pearce echoed the sentiment saying children must be protected from themselves and the lure of rich professional sporting contracts. So can you just expand maybe on that for our listeners? For underage sport being soccer, football, rugby, what do you think these sports should be doing now to protect these children?
Yeah, so that was in relation to a sort of a series of articles that's being published in the Herald Sun and News Corp this weekend, and part of it was to try and argue the fact that we need to have some modified versions of these contact sports until the age of 14 years of age, to try and reduce that exposure. And the concern was that kids are trying, or kids and parents, I guess, maybe if I could be so bold to say that parents are pushing kids into specializing in these sports at a very young age. And, we certainly know now from the sports science, sports medicine research that early specialization generally isn't that good, because we find that players or athletes will drop out earlier, they'll have chronic injuries. And then on top of that, if you're playing a contact team sport, your exposure is starting to increase. Now with kids, they're not in the position of giving informed consent on playing these sports. They kind of go, well, mum and dad have pushed me into this. I've got to keep playing this sport. I don't know if I really want to or not. The informed consent is not there, and so I get lots of text messages and messages through social media and that saying that my friend's mum is really concerned. She's got a friend who's pushing her kids into returning after a concussion, and they've already had 8 concussions this season, and they think it's not an issue. And how do I tell them that this is an issue? Or you get a sports trainer saying, well, I tried to stop a kid from returning to play, but couldn't. They got a second impact, and now they've got amnesia for the last 4 weeks. They're just, every week I get time and time again. I guess that's where that comment comes from, is that we've got to try and protect these kids.
Would you go as far to say, let's say up to the age of under 15 sports, you would call for no contact in any kind of sport, and say especially soccer, ban the use of heading balls and things like that? So would you go that far?
Yeah, that's already started in, the banning of heading's already started in the UK, with a trial on banning headers for kids 12 years and under at the moment. Scotland have got a ban on heading the day before and the day after a soccer match to try and reduce that exposure. Rugby have in the UK, I guess, a directive from the RFU, the English Rugby Union, that they're limiting contact training per week to 15 minutes. And Dan might be able to sort of clarify with me, but I believe in some states in America, they're also trying to modify sports in American football to the age of about 14 years of age as well. And it's a state-by-state thing. So there are some moves. So we need to be, not dragging our feet here in Australia.
Alan, just to follow up on that. Alan, it is one that they're going more towards flag football, trying to get, and it's becoming a very popular sport, popular enough in the women's side now that the NCAA is actually looking to add it as a potential evolving sport in some ways. But they've also, in the last, probably since CTE was formulated, even the movie Concussion when it came out, they've really taken a look at how to tackle, how to block, let head up type approaches. But I think it's interesting. I'm looking at this online too. College football, I've seen a lot in practices in college football, but I think it's marketed terribly. I mean, they call them concussion prevention helmets. I don't think there's any type of helmet, Alan, that can prevent concussions. But when you look at football helmets, safe football helmets, I'm literally pulling up one that says concussion prevention helmets, and you can't have a concussion prevention helmet. But no. I know concussions well. I played, in the 80s, so I know it was, ESPN, Sports Center, leading with your head, blowing up guys, Ronnie Lott, Dave Duerson, all those kind of players. So you kind of grew up with that style of football because it made ESPN highlights. But it's interesting now, as you said, it's, in women's sports, it's soccer, and interestingly enough, cheerleading that causes more concussions. And in the male sports, obviously, it's football, it's soccer, and those type of sports. But I'd love your thought on concussion prevention helmets. I love the fact you're rolling your eyes, but that's what you see a lot of the college football teams using during practice week before they get out there during the game week.
That's I'm surprised that they're actually able to get away with that wording, to be honest, because there is no evidence of any protection from concussion with a helmet. So, certainly helmets have that protection for fractures of the skull, lacerations, sports like equestrian, cycling, motorcycle riding. Yeah, wear a helmet, absolutely. But it's not meant to be seen as a protection for concussion, because the brain tissue still moves inside the skull. And we've talked about this before previously, where the brain tissue is so delicate, and it doesn't take a lot for the brain tissues, the neurons themselves, to what we call stretch or shear. And a helmet doesn't dissipate anywhere enough force for that. Plus, and I'm going to sort of throw this in as a real confusion here, but concussion actually isn't the issue. with the study that we talked about at the start with Boston Uni and they also brought out a study about 4 weeks or 5 weeks prior to that in American football, and what they showed was that concussion had no influence on American footballers getting CTE, the risk of CTE. And what they found was that, again, it's this exposure to just repetitive impacts, just the collisions, the tackles, the, going to ground, hitting the grounds, whatever. And in that study, they showed that quarterbacks had a 4-fold risk of CTE, but defensive linebackers had 107 times the risk, because of the type of position they played was then giving that characteristics of the impacts that they were measuring using sensors in the helmet. So it's a disease of exposure, but it's also a disease of significant exposure. So we don't know here in Australia, for certain reasons, being that we don't have any data released. There's no transparency in the science, that we don't know if midfielders in Australian rules football, for example, are at higher risk than, say, fullbackers or full forwards. We don't know. We will never know, because we will never see the data and we can't correlate that. And so while we keep talking about concussions, and concussions aren't great, but trust me, it's not great. If you have 3 or more concussions, your risk of cognitive impairments, mental health is certainly influenced. But it's the tens of thousands of hits over a lifetime that is the risk of CTE.
I've had 3 concussions, so I might be in that zone. But this year, I coached an under-13s football team, and I think we had 4 concussions. Now, the way they happened were different. So one looked like a contest. We don't know. He doesn't know. I just know that he didn't play for 6 weeks because he had lingering impacts. We had another kid, and this is where I think, and I know we're talking concussions, but I think this is where sport and the coaches need to accept significant responsibility, is the way that kids tackle these days. They watch the AFL or they watch the NRL, whatever it is, and sling tackles should be outlawed.
Yeah.
But guess what? They're not. They're still happening. And those are the ones, it's not the contact, it's actually when they hit the ground that they hit their head. So it's not the actual contact with a player or anything like that.
Yes.
It's actually when it hits the ground.
That's right. Absolutely. And so grounds
and then,
harder.
Yeah, and then further that, Alan, is that I'm on the executive of the club as well. So we've got a policy that's league wide. It's 11 days you can't train for.
Yep.
And we get questioned on that by parents.
Yes.
About why that is the case. Can we get a second opinion? I find it hard to sort of just go, listen, surely your kid's 13, 12, whatever it is.
Yeah.
They've got hopefully 50 or 70 years left of their lives, whatever it is, and you're going to challenge over 11 days.
Yes. Absolutely. And this is something that, I keep trying to talk about publicly, is the fact that, for 1 or 2 extra weeks of non-contact, you could probably extend your career by 5 or 6 years. And obviously then the longer term quality of life after you finish up your footy or whatever. But it's incredible that people are not that, they just can't sort of conceptualize, 20 or 30 years down the track. So the best way to say it is, look, if you want to keep playing for another 5 or 6 years, we only have to look at this year. I think at the end of the season, there've been 4 retirements. And again, they use the term, I think it was Marcus Adam was, emotional, devastated that he can't play footy anymore. And not only that, can't even probably play even local footy with his mates, because one more hit to the head could be catastrophic. And, like they're 21, 22, 24, 25. It's and that's the sort of stuff that I try and get through to parents, that the imperative to play next week could actually be damaging your child in a decade's time when they're 20 years of age and they can't play at all. What do you want?
Alan, as I understand from the studies, that it doesn't matter at what age you pick up these hits. You can take up sport at 10 years old. You can also take it up at 20 years old of age, or 25. It's the amount of hits, not so much the age, which is really scary when you consider kids are taking up competitive contact sports at, say, 10.
Yep.
Listen to what you're saying, and particularly it was interesting about the duty of care to yourself, that kids should be able to make a decision, not based on what their parents tell them or what their coach tells them. They should be at an age where they can actually make their mind up themselves. It seems to me, you combine the two things, I can see a situation where contact sports shouldn't be played by children until they're 16. They can learn all the skills.
Yeah.
Nobody cares how good a 15-year-old is. No one's going to, it's not going to be televised. It's not going to be world defining. Plus, they're not going to be their best until they're probably 18, 19, 20.
Yes.
But they could ruin themselves by the age of 16 if they've already built up this mythical number or unknown number of concussions. So it's a silly idea not to have contact sport until you're at least 16 and you can make your own decisions.
Oh, look, absolutely. The 14 was really, I guess, a bit of a mediation in a sense that we would obviously, like to maybe make it 18, but, politically that would be a very hard sell. At least at 14, if kids are starting at, 6 years of age, 5 years of age, for example, Heather Anderson, who we announced as the first female athlete to get CTE or diagnosed with CTE, she was 28. She started playing rugby at 5 years of age before changing to AFL or Australian rules football. And so she had already had about 8 to 9 years of exposure already. So I guess by saying 14, we can try and push it back a little bit. But yeah, 16, is certainly a number as well. The brain doesn't actually fully develop until early to mid 20s. But the critical periods of development are in that sort of childhood, early adolescence. So we're sort of trying to at least be a little bit more palatable than hitting. Bennett Omalu, for example, who was the first to diagnose CTE, said 18 point blank. We've been trying to be a little bit more political in our messaging and trying to get people on board rather than just pushing people away and attacking us.
Overnight, we've just had the start of the Rugby Union World Cup, which in Melbourne is another well hidden
Yeah.
sport.
Rugby, right?
But overnight there was a red card handed out to, I think it was an English player or whoever it was, an accidental head knock. So there was an accidental head clash, and the person that initiated the head clash got a red card. Now, I've never seen that before. And like if you look at the AFL the other night as an example with Maynard, I just found it really interesting to see there was a totally accidental, no intention, no malice, no.
Yeah.
And so are we going to start seeing more and more of that at the elite level? And we've got to become accepting of the fact that this is the way it's going to be. We can't have the analogy back in the good old days, or gee, it's gone soft, or it's weak.
It's I think at this stage, and you know, maybe John can clarify here too from a legal perspective, but the sports are very risk adverse now at the moment because they are really worried. I mean, with rugby, for example, is a class action in the UK at the moment. Obviously, we have potentially 2 class actions here in Australia. There's talk about another class action against rugby league, but I haven't seen any progress on that. So I think the sports are almost a little, going too far the other way in terms of risk aversion. I mean, if you're playing and this is the reason why we want to have modified sports for kids, because if you play a contact sport, you are going to get concussions. What we're concerned about is the fact that there are the mix-up of concussion versus repetitive head trauma.
Yep.
And if someone does get concussed and it's not intentional, it could be, there has to be some sort of middle ground here on this. But I think at the moment, the sports are really quite worried.
Alan, the Boston study, I don't know if it dissected the actual sports that the 152 athletes were involved in, but I imagine the NFL gridiron was one of the prominent sports. And just if you can possibly draw a line on what sports do you think are particularly more likely to invoke CTE?
Well, certainly those sports where it's, I mean, without a question, it's the combat sports, obviously, and we've known that since 1928 anyway. But in terms of the contact sports, basically all the football codes, ice hockey, lacrosse possibly as well. But we do, we've seen BMX as well because of particularly the BMX jumpers, the more sort of acrobatic ones who do constant jumps and fall and land badly. And then obviously outside of sport, then we start to see military and unfortunately domestic violence.
All right, Alan, the Senate released their report on concussion and repeated head trauma during the week.
Yeah.
The Senate committee made 13 recommendations. Give us your thoughts on the recommendations, and did they go far enough?
Well, yeah, look, I mean, it's the fact that we actually got to an inquiry is something I never thought would happen. So I'm very appreciative of that. That took a fair amount of lobbying. And I know that, Lydia Thorpe can be a bit of a divisive politician, but, she was the one that was able to at least get the inquiry up and running, which was great. The 13 recommendations sort of cover off quite a bit, and they also did have to try and deal with, a whole bunch of different sort of positions on this issue from, there's nothing to worry about through to, we have a potential epidemic. So in terms of, the positives I saw out of the recommendations, the fact that they actually acknowledged the links between repetitive head trauma and risk of CTE was great, because that certainly goes against the concussion in sport group, who are still yet to actually acknowledge that there is a link. So that was good. They also talked about the fact that we need more research in this area because we just don't know enough at the moment. So there needs to be some specialized stream for research in this area, including CTE. So the fact at the moment is that we do have some funding going into concussion. It's all about a concussion. It's not actually about CTE. So that's good. Recommendations for donations and pledging of brains from athletes at all levels to a brain bank, and preferably the Australian Sports Brain Bank. But on the flip side, I thought some of the wording in terms of the recommendations were a little bit weak, or maybe in political speak. I was a bit disappointed about the fact that they said we need to explore with the sports about rule modifications. And my worry about that is the sports are going to come back and say, well, we've already done that. So AFL has said that their junior programs are non-contact until 10 or 11 years of age. The NRL have said that they're going to lift the age of first contact in their games until 8 years of age, which I'm just sort of still shaking my head on that one. And then they were talking about things like considering what else? What was the consideration of
Insurance scheme.
Which one? Sorry.
Insurance scheme and
insurance scheme. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
The other one, sorry, Alan, is what I thought was good was a recommendation to establish a national sports injury database.
Yes.
What I was worried about on the flip side, as you are, is who's going to do all this stuff, and it just seemed to me that it's really putting it back onto the sports.
Yeah.
Lydia Thorpe, who surprised me actually as being the leader of this inquiry, but nevertheless, she was rather cynical about the commitment of sports to getting to the bottom of all of this, because I think she felt that it was a bad look for a lot of sports. But good and bad.
That's right, exactly, and I mean, none of these recommendations are going to have any impact at all unless they get enacted into some sort of law. So that's the next fight that we have on our hands.
Alan, that ain't happening. Once you read that report, that ain't happening. In fact, it seemed to be that Lydia Thorpe, to me, was a voice of sense, because with the recommendations, she actually gave her input into the recommendations, and she basically said, look, I started this inquiry, happy that it happened, but God, come on, guys, we can do a lot better than this. Yes,
that's right. She'd had her own list in that at the back of that report too, and I do have to appreciate one of her points where she did, in indirect terms, talk about my experience.
All right.
All right, Alan. Well, thanks for coming back on the program today. We really appreciate it. As we all on this panel know, it's a very important topic, and one that doesn't seem to get much airplay on a lot of the other sports programs. But as I said, they're two rather major reports that have come out in the last couple of weeks, and we thought it was great to have you on the show again.
No, anytime, and I really appreciate being able to talk frankly to you guys. So, no, thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Alan.
Yeah, Alan.
Thanks,
All
Alan.
right, Paul, you've been very quiet. I think that's the first time for half an hour in a show that I haven't heard from you.
It's a zinger-free zone so far, Professor.
That's right. So we better look at NRL finals in the men, week 1. Started on a Friday night with the Broncos absolutely pulverising the Storm.
Well, thank you for getting last week's result there with the Rabbitohs that I tipped to win it all gone. And by the way, a very big hello from Upway. And there's roosters in the background here, which is fitting. We'll talk about that soon. You might hear Puffing Billy in the background as well if you listen out. But no, so the Rabbitohs gone. We'll cover that off very quickly and move on. Thank you. The Broncos, they looked very impressive against the Storm. It was a horror night for Craig Bellamy, as you saw in the box. He's often quite irate in there. He often can't watch, paces around like a death row inmate, but he just had his head in his hands. And a big part of that was the injury to Pappenhausen, who's worked so hard to get back. Thankfully, it wasn't a concussion-type injury, but that won't be much comfort for Storm fans with his season looking over. So that's just a real heartbreaking moment for the Storm. But in terms of the result, it was an absolute demolition, 26-0. I can't remember when the Storm were held to nil in a big game. You might be able to help me there, anyone on the panel, but that was a really tough result for the Storm, but shows how good the Broncos are.
I'll tell you when it was. It was the big games was the grand final against Manly.
Manly.
46-0.
I was about to say that's the last time I could. And that was just I think Cameron Smith was ruled out for that game. Their entire game plan ran through Cameron Smith. It was like a circus without a ringmaster that day. I do remember that game. But you've also got the Panthers stepping up, absolutely belting the Warriors, who were in hot form. But with Sean Johnson out, it was a similar scenario to way back with Cameron Smith out for the Storm in that grand final. So there's two teams that the bookies are going to play off in the grand final, it seems, the Broncos and the Panthers. After such a close competition, those two are front and centre in the queue. So they couldn't have been more impressive, either of those teams. And it would be appropriate if the Rooster fired up now, because that was one of the better Roosters wins in about 10 years. So they had injuries galore and somehow managed to win at Shark Park, and everything was against them. So that was a very good win for the Roosters.
Paul, the Sharks, and I assume you've seen Craig Fitzgibbon's press conference afterwards, but they played at home. The Roosters got injuries, more injuries this game. They went down to 10 men with probably their most influential player in Tedesco off the ground. And the only score that the Sharks could put on was the penalty. That then obviously gave them the confidence, and they went on to win with a field goal. Now, the Sharks, they've got to be deemed to be underperforming.
They've lost 5 in a row, 5 finals in a row. They just don't seem to be able to get the big scalps. The Roosters had more men down than Saving Private Ryan. It was an unbelievably brave effort from the Roosters, but the Sharks, on the flip side, couldn't get it done. And Nico Hines had a decent game, set up a couple of tries, but he needed to step up and put that Roosters team away, and he couldn't. He didn't. So you'd be devastated as a Sharks fan today.
I didn't think that Nico got enough of the ball. He doesn't seem to get enough of the ball at important times of the game. Now, last night in that 10 minutes, Trindle touched the ball more, who's not as creative as Hines. It was, I don't know who decides where it goes, which side of the ruck it goes, whatever it does. But if you actually, the Sharks, Hines doesn't seem to get or put his hands on the ball enough. In the first half, he had plenty of it because they look good.
Yep. Keep in mind, when the Sharks were surging and firing, it was when Matt Moylan was at 6. So he's dropped off. Trindle impressed. But again, I will say it, I think they're flat track bullies, the Sharks and Nico Hines. So they went with Trindle, who looked great in some of these later rounds against some lesser teams. But when the pressure was on, and you better believe a final against the Roosters, there's as much pressure as you can get or up there, he just didn't deliver. And you've got these Roosters, you've got Luke Keary, who Russell Crowe famously said, you're not good enough, you're being overpaid. And he's now gone on and won 2 flags for the Roosters and possibly one of their best players. So I still don't know what Russell Crowe was thinking about that. He played incredibly well, but Sam Walker, who'd been sent to reserve grade only a couple of months ago, stepped up ice cool. It's like kicking, I'll give you an analogy, 40 metres out, 50 metres out, goal to win it. And that's what Walker did. So the coach putting him into reserve grade got him back to earth. I don't know if he was getting cocky or just needed to work on his skills, but Walker was a big reason they won that game last night. And all these wins come from the halves.
All right, Paul,
can I just quickly ask an issue with home finals? This game was played at Shark Park in front of 12,500 people.
Yep.
Rugby League has invested so much money in building a new stadium in Sydney, just down the road, which has got 50,000 capacity plus.
Yep.
Why wasn't that used?
Well, the reason is that the principle they've made is that the team deserves to get a home final if it finishes ahead of the other team that they're playing. They don't have this neutral venue type rule like the AFL with the MCG and Etihad or Marvel Stadium. The problem is, I think as well, the Sharks weren't going to drive to move it away because they don't get any of the takings. So if they had have got the takings for 50,000 instead of 10,000, you better believe they would have moved that to one of the biggest stadiums. So they need to look at that because it on one hand, it's if you're a home team, you deserve a final. keep in mind we still use the suburban grounds, unlike the AFL. So the benefit of finishing higher is to get the benefit of your ground, however small it is. But it may be time for commerciality and for the fans to move it to the bigger stadiums.
Yeah, when you just compare, say the football round, this one with the AFL had over 280,000. Like, you know, certainly had the right games being played. And then you have NRL, who you're saying commercially is trying to compete with that, and TV coverage is fantastic, but you just 12,000 people just seems, you know, when you're trying to sell the game, just doesn't seem right.
The flip side of that, though, and this is the game we'll talk about, is if you brought in that rule where it had to be played at the big stadiums, you'd deny the Newcastle Knights their game today, because that would have to be played at the big stadium in Sydney. So that the Knights, I think there's 30,000, which doesn't sound a lot by AFL standards, but that town of Newcastle, they would have been lining up from Thursday to get into that ground there this afternoon. It's been a long time. So unfortunately, if you did bring in that neutral rule, if you call it that, Newcastle, I've mentioned it many times, a lot like Geelong. It's a proud football city. Everyone from there goes for the one team, and it'll be great for league if the Knights win this afternoon, and great for the city of Newcastle.
And fantastic, but also probably 10,000 supporters of the other side missing out.
You're right. Well, the Raiders fans, there are probably not many of those that would travel, a few thousand perhaps. But you're right. They could have put it at a 50,000 seater stadium, that one as well. So there's a lot of fans. I don't know whether they would have got the 50,000 to a new. Maybe there needs to be some discretion in it, because you wouldn't move this game away from Newcastle, but you certainly would have moved that Cronulla game.
Look, Gelding, it's the same as the AFL. Like, we maximise the MCG, but they could have filled that twice over last Thursday night. So you're going to have people miss out. So, and rugby league, let's be honest, they're happy with the crowds that they get. Like, it's a sport that's made for TV nowadays. It's not necessarily a game you go to watch. That's where I think the Melbourne Storm are different, and Newcastle as well, Paul. Those teams that are probably one city teams, or one team city, sorry. So Newcastle today will be huge. But yeah, I get your point, Gelding. But at the end of the day, like last night, Shark Park, was Scott there last night? Was he, Paul? I didn't see him.
Oh, he's there within a week of moving into the area. I know that much with his Shark scarf on.
Was it a photo opportunity for him?
He didn't have a hard hat on. Paul, the other thing that from last night's game, and something that I think's been overlooked, is the ability to have a good kicker for goal or conversions.
Yeah.
Now, Trindle missed one that I reckon we could have put over, maybe on our left foot.
ScoMo could have kicked it. Yeah.
Okay, well, yeah, there you go. So at the end of the day, they've either got to kick or get a penalty, or they've then got to go for a 2-point field goal, which makes it even harder.
Yeah, that's how important kicking is. So it does show you the benefit of that. And the Roosters had probably their fourth string kicker step up, Billy Smith. So that's a big reason they won the game.
All right, Paul, 2 questions quickly. Today's game, Knights against Raiders, who'll win and why? And the second question is, if the Knights do succeed, are they the only team left that could trouble either the Broncos or the Panthers?
First of all, the Knights should win today, just for the benefit of home field advantage. I think the Raiders have done well. I think their time will run out. Probably a final score 30-10. I think the Knights could really run away over the Raiders. There is a team that can win, and I think it's the Storm. The Storm have gone up very short against the Roosters, who I think might have played their grand final last night. So the Storm, I think, will win next week against the Roosters, and then they'll be a very dangerous proposition for whichever of Brisbane or Penrith that they play. I did want to say there was a post I didn't like on Instagram from the Panthers going up the Pars, which was taking off the Warriors up the Wars, which has taken over New Zealand and a large part of rugby league world. The Warriors are the reason this game still is revolving and it's still being played because of the COVID restrictions. The Warriors moving their entire life onto the Gold Coast. That's what made the game keep continuing. It didn't miss. So I don't think the Panthers should be that cocky.
Who do you think it was, Paul, behind it? There's only one name.
Jerome Luai was the post, but there was an official club post I didn't like either. But I did want to say earlier, just on the Broncos, who I think are probably my tip to win it all now, that quote of the week was from Matthew Johns. He said, when they're at their prime with Gordon Tallis, who we've had on the show, etc., even the ball boy gave me shit. So they've got that swagger back at the Broncos. I don't think anyone else can stop them except the Panthers, and I hope for league that the Broncos win.
All right,
Paul, sorry, Professor, just like you mentioned
very quickly,
there.
David.
You mentioned the arrogance there. It's a very different arrogance to what we're seeing from the Panthers over the last 12 to 24 months.
It is. It definitely is, yeah.
All right, Paul. Now we're just going to unlock the time capsule. You gave your prognostications way back in March. How did you go?
The line's just cutting out. Sorry. Yeah. I'm not here this afternoon to answer questions about the top 8. I'm here to talk about what's best for Victoria, and I'll address the Storm only. No, I think I missed 3 times this year out of the 8, which is probably one of my worst strike rates in 10 years. So not a great year on the prediction front.
What about this ticket I've got here, Paul? 10-1 the Rabbitohs to win the flag. Can you comment on that after following your advice in March?
Yeah, no, I'd have to say that wasn't my best tip, that one. So not ideal.
And I don't even get another bet because they missed the 8, didn't they?
They did miss the 8, yes.
Right.
Yes.
All right, Paul. Look, to get 5 out of 8 is still an excellent strike rate. We really appreciate what you do, and we'll look forward to talking with you further as the finals matches proceed. Now, Dan, we've got you back the first time since January. Last time we spoke to you, Aaron Rodgers was playing for the Green Bay Packers. He hadn't been on a darkness retreat and hadn't been approached by the New York Jets. Just shows you what happens while you're off air.
It definitely shows you what happens when I'm off air, but it shows you what happens when you go into a darkness retreat and you come out and you see the New York Jets in your future. I don't know if that was a good darkness retreat, if he needs to go back and reset in a darkness retreat, Mark. So it's definitely a new era for the Green Bay Packers and definitely a new era for the New York Jets. This might be the most they've been talked about since Joe Namath in the 60s.
Gelding, just before you come in, Gelding, I just got one more for Dan, just on Aaron Rodgers. Who would have thought that Jordan Love would have been spoken about just as much as Aaron Rodgers? Like the two, once one decided what he was going to do, the microscope went on Jordan Love.
Exactly. And, it's funny how the Bears and the Detroit Lions and all these other ones are finally saying, hey, we might have a chance against the Packers, with Jordan Love in the seat. So it's going to be really interesting to see how these first few games go for the Packers and the Jets with new quarterbacks.
All right, Gelding.
Yes, sorry, Professor. Dan, can you explain a darkness retreat for myself and the listeners?
So a darkness retreat, from what I'm understanding it, you're out in the forest somewhere. This individual has these huts that are in complete darkness, supposedly no sound, anything. You just go in there for a few days, just sensory, everything there's no sensory deprivation at all. You're just in this dark place where all you got to do is get your mind focused, and I don't know what else you do in there, but that's what it is. Just a big dark hut. And you're just spending all that time in darkness, trying to figure out who you are, what you're doing, whether to play football anymore, whether to retire, whether to leave the Packers, go to the Jets. I still don't know where that light came in.
Now, what would Aaron Rodgers paid to go and sit in this dark place?
It is pretty significant from what I'm understanding. And there's months upon months of reservations. He made it a little more popular, but I guess this is a lot more popular than what we thought. They did a lot of stories on it when he was in. I almost felt like it was almost a papal thing where you want to see the black or white smoke come up when they're trying to choose a new pope in that respect. What happens when he comes out or when he's about to come out? So it's definitely a popular thing, particularly those that are in the Zen philosophy, it seems like.
Something for Byron Bay.
All right.
Exactly.
Now, Dan, Kansas were the Super Bowl champions last year. Do you see anybody in the AFC challenging them? Maybe the Bills, the Jaguars?
Yeah, I think, Mark, it's interesting. The Chiefs played the Detroit Lions on Thursday night, and Detroit came out and won that game. The Chiefs always seem to stumble a little early in the season and get red hot. But obviously, Travis Kelce, their tight end was out. So the Chiefs didn't have all their weapons going into that. And there was a lot of drop passes for Patrick Mahomes in that game. But I think you got to look at the Buffalo Bills. I think you got to look at the Cincinnati Bengals. I think you got to look at the Kansas City Chiefs in the AFC. And there's been a lot of talk about Jacksonville and Trevor Lawrence potentially being an MVP candidate, which is surprising given that he wasn't very good his first year. So it is really going to be interesting to see how good this team actually looks on the AFC side.
Dan, was that only because KFC couldn't catch the ball on third down? Mahomes seemed to be in good form, but the wide receivers and tight ends couldn't hold. They needed some glue on their fingers. I don't know. And it seemed to be happening on third down.
Watching those passes go through wide receivers' fingers, Gelding. I mean, literally, Patrick Mahomes was putting them in the right place. Rushed a few times, but he did get the ball right in their hands, and that went right through their hands. So it was crazy to watch.
Dan, is it just me, or does there seem to be a fairly big, well, significant quality difference between the AFC teams and the NFC teams?
Absolutely, Mark. I 100% agree with that. I think the younger quarterbacks, the more talent right now is on the AFC side, and obviously they're showing that by winning the Super Bowl quite consistently right now. I mean, as you look at NFC teams, it really is a stretch to determine if there's really a favorite, not only to win the Super Bowl, but which team might get to the Super Bowl. I think the San Francisco 49ers are probably the stronger team right now on the NFC side and probably the most favored team to get in the Super Bowl. But there's not another team right off the top of my head that just, comes to mind that I say that the Giants, the Cowboys, or any others that just come to mind saying, hey, they got a chance.
Okay. Long range predictions. We're into long range predictions.
Yeah, I saw Paul jumped off. I mean, Paul didn't want to hear my long range predictions. So as you look at the Super Bowl, my gut feel tells me right now I like the Buffalo Bills. They've been close the last couple of years. I think this is one of those years, as long as Josh Allen can stay healthy. I think they are probably the favorite right now to get into the Super Bowl. Joe Burrow just got a huge contract. I never like it when a quarterback gets a massive contract. It kind of de-escalates the motivation to have great success, in my opinion. Always put that carrot of that contract at the end of the year and make sure that they're playing at the highest level they can. So I'm going to go with the Buffalo Bills on the NFC side, and I'm going to stay with the San Francisco 49ers right now on the NFC side. And obviously there's a long season to go and a lot of healthy players that have to stay healthy, but that's right now what my gut's telling me.
All right. Well, college football's also kicked off for the season. And I see that Georgia and Michigan are ranked 1 and 2, which is probably no surprise. Who do you see vying for those top spots?
Well, and just an update too, fellas, the Texas Longhorns beat the number 3 Alabama Crimson Tide just moments ago. So Texas, deep in the heart of Texas, big upset loss tonight. But I think the story of the year right now, Mark, seems to be the Colorado Buffaloes in many ways. I mean, Deion Sanders comes from Jackson State, an historically Black college and university football program that's not very well known, to come over and coach the Colorado Buffaloes. And they've won 2 straight, pretty dominating fashion in his first 2 games. I mean, they literally packed the place up at Colorado today against Nebraska. Nebraska, the game wasn't even as close as the score indicated. It was 35-14 as a final. But I think you've got to look at the standard bearers. I think the Pac-12 conference, the news that's come out of the Pac-12 over the last month is unfortunate. It looks like they're going to be disbanding potentially. A lot of their institutions are going to other conferences starting in the 24 season. But as of the start of the day, they were still undefeated after the first 2 weeks of play. And I think USC, Ohio State, Michigan, Georgia, Texas right now, Colorado, I think those are teams that people are going to be paying attention to here in the weeks ahead. But the Pac-12 is probably the most dominant conference in college football right now.
Okay. Yep, go on, Kuda.
Yeah, Dan, what's the contract or the money that's being paid to the coach of the Buffaloes, please?
I don't know the exact parameters, Cooter, but I know he got a pretty substantial contract. In fact, it was so much money that the University of Colorado didn't have enough to pay him. They hoped to sign. They signed him to a massive contract, hoping. I guess you call it the Field of Dreams philosophy. If you build it, they will come. They signed him. They didn't know how they were going to pay for it, but the success he's having, obviously, I think it was you could buy season tickets last year, so the whole season last year at the University of Colorado. It cost you $222 to get in. The tickets for the Nebraska game today, which was a completely sold out, a ticket for the Nebraska game was over $450. One game ticket for the game today, and they showed up and they played. So good, they've got the money. Now it's a pretty significant contract. I know it's a few $1 million, if not more, per season, which is a big stretch for the University of Colorado. But the decision's proven well for Rick George, the AD at Colorado.
And just talking about money, the last time we spoke, there was that Supreme Court decision which allowed college athletes to be paid for their endorsements and their likenesses, and it was felt that this is the opening of the floodgates, and there'll be so much money in college sports that it's going to sort of ruin the amateurism of the sports. What's happened since then?
Record crowds in some ways, relative to football stadiums. I mean, I think, there were so many people that wanted to be negative, trying to get Congress and trying to get others, the judicial system, to not allow this name, image, and likeness, trying to get out there and throw a lot of darts against it. But I've never had a concern with student athletes being paid to work. If they're going out and using social media feeds, doing commercials, those type of things. I don't have any problem with them getting paid to work in that respect. The question comes down, the challenge comes right now is pay to play. There's a lot of pay to play going on in college athletics, particularly the football and basketball side. In men's sports, mainly. Women's sports, probably about 90% of the money, Judge, is going to men's sports, and about 10% is going to women's sports. You'll hear a couple of good stories on the women's side, the gymnast from LSU, the women's basketball player from Louisiana State, but you're not hearing a lot of women's sports getting a lot of that money. But football, men's basketball players are getting a lot of money right now to play. And that's where you'll hear a lot of stories about name, image, and likeness combined with the transfer portal. Student athletes are putting their name. They don't want to go to this school anymore. They want to go to a new school. A lot of tampering going on with, hey, if you get yourself in the transfer portal and you come to my school, I'll pay you $50,000. A lot of things that are going on behind the scenes now that were illegal 10 years ago, that right now are somewhat legal, and the NCAA is trying to put some guardrails to make it more competitively balanced in many ways.
It's a story we often hear. The women in the AFLW are starting to get pay. It's not decent pay. It's no one's hardly any professionals. But the doomsay is saying, "Oh God, what the women won't be paid now? That's going to be the death of football. Won't be able to afford it." It's a story we often hear, and it's always nonsense.
Absolutely, and there's a tremendous number of great women's athletes that could do endorsement deals and really get some serious pay if corporations would actually look at that direction and put some money towards those efforts.
It's an interesting one, Judge, you talk about the AFLW, because at the moment it's being reported that is a significant hold-up, or part of the reason there's a hold-up that the collective agreement isn't or hasn't been signed is because the women want more of that pot. Now, I would think that there's plenty. I would think personally, and without looking at the figures, that there would be plenty of money go around, because you're signing record grants, you're signing record broadcast rights, sponsorship. They've got the names that you want involved. I just don't get that, and we don't hear enough from the. We do actually, because he commentated a game the other day. But we'll push on. Yeah.
All right, Dan, give us your college playoff 2.
Oof. College playoff 2. That's going to be a challenge. I think, USC right now in the Pac-12, I think USC is probably right there with Georgia. If I had to pick today, and again, a lot of things have to go a lot of different directions, and staying healthy. But right now, I think those are probably the top 2 teams in college football.
Well, I acknowledge, Dan, it's a difficult question, but we love the difficult on Sports Fan Radio.
We like getting the early odds.
Like to bring it back 6 months later when it's when you requested it. So.
Well, that's why Paul's dropped out.
He's just jumped on Puffing Billy. He's had enough.
Now, before you go, Dan, this is a question without notice, but I just thought of it while I've been sitting here. The World Basketball Championship. US beaten by Germany. What happened there?
Well,
the crazy thing is the NBA players. I mean, obviously, when you look at a lot of the United States NBA players don't want to play in this event. They'll play in the Olympics, but they don't want to play in a World Basketball Championship. They don't want to risk the potential injuries. The Paul George type situations where you could break your leg and be out for a year. So it's funny how you literally see the scores and the social media feeds following the game, and like they're going to lose this game. This doesn't matter because they're going to throw pros in the Olympics. That type of attitude. So that's kind of the attitude of the United States right now. Is it's not necessarily a big championship. We'll worry about the Olympics and go win that with the NBA players. So, but again, you guys all know. I mean, most of the guys that are on the teams, Australia, Germany, all these teams, Spain, they're all NBA players nowadays. So it's good. It's what makes the Olympics at this level nowadays just a tremendous basketball.
I think Australia, Dan, had 11 players that are registered for the upcoming NBA season. So, like years ago, we would have had a lot more local product out of the NBL here. But I think it's been a pretty good tournament, Professor. I note that the Australian team didn't play in Manila. Was there a reason behind that, or no?
That's an historical, which we covered earlier on Sports Fan Radio many years ago. David,
sure, in Manila.
Dan, I did like one of the, I can't remember which US basketball it was, but in the press conference after, he was asked about them losing the game, and he turned around and said, yeah, world champion of what?
That's the attitude. I mean, again, and it's funny because a lot of the people, unless you're really versed in basketball, you kind of look at that team and like, who are you? It's like, who did you play for? Where were you from? Type thing with some of the players that are on that team. So I didn't even recognize some of the players on that team.
Now, we were texting during the week, Dan, and you sent me a photo from Las Vegas and a photograph of the Perth Wildcats bench, and a former Sports Fan Radio commentator, John Riley, was on the bench.
That he was. It's crazy. I'm in Las Vegas in the Henderson, Nevada area, working on the Big West Basketball Championships coming up in March. And I go over to the G League, which is the Gatorade League. It's the NBA's minor league system now. The G League Ignite is playing the Perth, Australia basketball team. So I'm looking across the bench. I'm like, holy cow, that's John Riley. So I end up spending Wednesday night. I spent some time with him after the game. We talked about Sports Fan Radio. I said, Mark wanted me to tell you hello. He goes, tell Mark anytime he wants me on the show, just to give me a ring. I'll be more than happy to do it. He goes, I love doing that show. And then I saw him again Thursday morning after practice. We spent a little bit of time together. So he's doing well. The team looked really good against the Overtime Elite or Overtime Ignite G League team. So kind of excited where Perth's going to go and follow our good friend.
Well, we'll no doubt be getting John on the program once the NBL season kicks off over here. So we've got him back in the fold.
Absolutely. I think he returns tomorrow. I think he said they were going to return on Sunday. So,
well done.
The only issue, Professor, might be the owners of that particular franchise and their connection to may not be allowed. Professor, there you go.
Oh well, we can try.
You're not naming the owners, David?
Craig from Oregon.
Craig from Oregon. I thought it was Craig from Toorak these days.
All right, gentlemen, we've almost run out of time. We can't go without your tips for today's races, Gelding. And before you give those tips, we got Willowed yesterday.
Yes, Professor. Confidence a little bit shattered yesterday. Luckily, we were on Charm Zone. But for those listeners, we did like Giga Kick. However, we were willowed. It's an expression that goes around racing now. When Craig Williams rides a race that can be regarded as being questionable, and on all the social platforms today, he's put his hand up and said it was his fault. He went way too early after the horse missed the kick. So we were willowed yesterday, Professor. Something when we do the tips for That's Racing, we can't really know that we're going to get such a bad ride. But anyway, at least he's put his hand up and admitted that it was his fault for the bad run.
Yeah, and one other one, Gelding, what looked like a bad run from Globe, who was eased down over the final 200 metres, and that was my selection in the ninth race yesterday. A post-race veterinary examination revealed cardiac arrhythmia, and the horse won't race again until the stewards are satisfied with veterinary reports that the horse is fit to run.
Professor, before when you were complaining about the noise, I was listening to Mick Price being interviewed, about it, and he said, "Look, it's just something we've got to put a line through that run, as if it didn't handle. Again, it has to pass the stewards, but he's tossing up whether to turn it out or just to give it a couple of weeks off and then start again, because Jamie Carr said the horse got the wobbles coming around the turn and was gone 600 metres from home. So, probably not a true reflection of the horse's capabilities with the run yesterday.
All right, what do you like today, Gelding?
Well, Professor, as you said, there's a few today. Trying to, after yesterday's result and being willowed. Firstly, we'll go to Cassidy. Professor, a race coming up at 1:12. I like Sunny Times, race 1, number 8, in the first. In the second, I like race 2, number 7, Grinzingerberg. We'll then go to race 5, number 1, Sun Samurai. And in the last race, 7, number 1, Diamond Luke. Now, we then move to the other meeting at Sale. We have one in race 2 on at 1:30, Professor. Race 2, number 2, Wolfie, will be a short price favourite to be ridden by Blake Shin, who's in great form at the moment. So I think that can get us away to a good start. Then I like race 4, number 2, Cape Deal. Into a race 5, number 6, Corio Bianchi, Nick Arnett and Benny Allen, the rider of the main winner at Moonee Valley yesterday. Then a race 6, number 7, which I think may be the bet of the day, Columbia Dior, trained by Mar Eustace and ridden by Benny Allen. And we'll finish in the last race 8, number 11, Suzadu. A few more than normal, Professor, but hopefully we can have a bit of a day on the punt.
Well, clearly, Gelding, if we parlay all those up and they're all successful, we won't be doing Sports Fan Radio for a while. We'll be off celebrating.
Mars suggests maybe a parlay on the ones at Cassidy and then have a separate parlay on the ones in Sale, Professor.
And we'll take a parlay on Dan's tips as well.
Oh, well, we'll have Dan's tips.
We'll have enough money to go and visit Dan.
Gamble responsibly, though.
Yes.
Gamble responsibly. But I would like to get Deligan's away address so I can send him the ticket on the Rabbitohs.
No worries. Dan, great to see you again.
Yeah.
Oh, always great to see you guys. Anytime you guys want me on the show, I'll be on the show. So,
Professor, you know how long it's been? Tennis in America was shit when Dan was on last time. And this morning they've got the US Open champion in Coco Gauff, who was brilliant. Played against a robot who didn't know anything other than game plan A. And then their men, they had men in the quarters for fun. So we're poo. Australia's poo at the moment in tennis, but America's made their great comeback, Dan.
David, I thought about that exactly this morning when I was getting ready for the show. I'm thinking, boy, last time we talked, we talked about U.S. tennis. Yeah. And I couldn't name a tennis player except for Coco Gauff and Serena Williams. Now, like you said, all of a sudden it's like we turned it around here in the last 6 months. So not a bad thing.
Amazing how things change, and an off-season of reflection for you, Judge.
Oh, look, we've done, I was presuming to make some kill, though. We've done probably as well as we ever thought we would. We've got some very exciting young players. So any of the Saints supporters a bit disappointed today as I am. The future's actually looking quite good, Professor.
Judge, certainly you'd give the season more than a pass mark. It's been a successful year. Like from the start of where you thought you'd be at the start of the year, this has been a fantastic season.
It's good. It's good.
There were 2 players yesterday, Judge, that I think Ross will say thank you, but I think that might be it. However, one of them has signed a contract, so I'm not sure whether or not you could throw that up in the air.
Yeah, no names. Who are you talking about?
I think you'd look at Dan Butler, and I think you'd look at Higgins after yesterday.
Higgins.
The acting and the playing, the throwing back of the head, and trying to milk free kicks, I don't think is a Ross Lyon brand of football, and it's certainly not endearing to your team.
Exactly.
David, you're talking about premiership players here.
Oh, yeah.
We're premiership players.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen. Thanks very much for your participation today. Much appreciated as always, and very good afternoon to you all.